Hey guys, tonight we're stepping back in time, not to the grand ballrooms or the bustling industrial factories, but into the hushed, often hidden corners of Victorian London. Imagine, if you will, the swirling, choking pea soup fog, thick and yellow, clinging to your eyelashes, tasting of coal smoke and damp earth. You pull your threadbare shawl tighter around your shoulders, the biting wind cutting right through the thin fabric. Horse-drawn cabs splash through puddles, their lamps casting murky halos in the gloom, and the distant shouts of street vendors fade into the perpetual drizzle. This isn't the romantic London of gaslight and grand architecture you see in period dramas. This is the London of desperation, of cold hunger gnawing at your insides, where the choices are few and the consequences are dire. You're about to discover what it was truly like to be a woman with no options, walking the razor's edge of survival in a society that preferred to pretend you didn't exist. You probably won't survive this, at least not with your illusions intact. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're listening, drop a comment with your location and local time. It's always fun to see how far these sleepy stories travel. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself standing on a grimy street corner, the roar of the city a constant, oppressive presence. Every breath is a shallow gulp of polluted air, every glance a calculation of threat and opportunity. Perhaps you've come from the countryside, lured by the promise of work that never materialized. Or maybe your family has fallen on hard times, the workhouse a looming shadow you'd rather die than enter. The truth is, for countless women in Victorian England, the path to destitution was terrifyingly short. A father's death, a husband's abandonment, an illness, or simply not earning enough from grueling factory work or needlework. Any one of these could plunge you into an abyss of poverty. And from that abyss, a certain kind of solution often presented itself, cloaked in shame but promising a way to eat, to have a roof over your head, however temporary or tainted. Historians still argue whether the sheer scale of prostitution was a result of urban migration, overwhelming social support, or a deeper societal hypocrisy that created a desperate underclass. What's clear is that by the mid-19th century, it was a pervasive, undeniable reality. Official estimates varied wildly, from tens of thousands to well over 100,000 women in London alone, though the true number was almost certainly much higher. Hidden in plain sight, it wasn't always a dramatic, sudden fall. For many, it was a gradual slide, a series of tiny compromises made out of sheer necessity, each one chipping away at dignity until very little was left. You might have started as a street hawker, then perhaps resorted to occasional, casual encounters, and then, finally, the door of a brothel might have seemed less like a prison and more like a shelter from the storm. It's a quirky tidbit that some of the most prominent brothels advertise not directly, of course, but through subtle cues in shop windows nearby, like specific arrangements of flowers or certain types of lace. It was a secret language for those who knew how to read it. The city hums around you, a relentless machine. You watch a group of well-dressed gentlemen stroll past, their laughter echoing in the narrow alley. They don't see you, not really. They see a fleeting shadow, a disposable part of the urban landscape. And in that moment, the logic, however grim, becomes clear. Survival, just plain, simple survival. The alternative, starvation. The workhouse, a slow, agonizing death from exposure on the streets. Compared to that, the path that lies ahead, with all its unspeakable compromises, starts to look like a twisted form of salvation. You steel yourself, take a deep, shaky breath, and push open the heavy, anonymous door, stepping from the cold, indifferent street into what you can only hope is a warmer, if morally colder, interior. The clatter of hooves and the distant cries of the city instantly muffle behind you, replaced by the hushed murmur of voices and the faint scent of stale perfume. The heavy door swings shut behind you with a soft, padded thud, instantly muffling the street's cacophony. The air inside is warmer, thick with the cloying scent of cheap floral perfume, coal smoke, and something else, a faint, metallic tang that you can't quite place. Your eyes, accustomed to the dim street, slowly adjust to the subdued lighting from a gas lamp, its mantle hissing softly in a corner. You find yourself in what appears to be a parlor, surprisingly domestic in its arrangement. Not the sordid dens you might have imagined, but a room designed to put gentlemen at ease. There's a worn, velvet-covered sofa, a couple of armchairs, and a small, highly polished table laden with a decanter and some glasses. A fire crackles merrily in the grate, casting flickering shadows on the walls adorned with surprisingly tasteful, if somewhat faded, prints of pastoral scenes. It's almost cozy. You half expect to see a kindly aunt knitting in the corner. Not the reality that awaits. This initial impression, this veneer of respectability, is a deliberate facade. Of course. It's a commercial enterprise, after all, and even in the fancy houses, as some were called, the comfort of the clientele was paramount. It's a bit like modern marketing. Really, you wouldn't want to scare off your customers with too much grim reality right out of the gate. A woman emerges from an inner doorway. Her rustling skirts a quiet counterpoint to the hissing gaslight. She's older, perhaps in her late 40s or 50s. Her face a roadmap of hard-won experience, though her eyes retain a sharp, assessing glint. This is the madam, the woman who runs this establishment. She isn't overtly friendly, nor is she cruel. She simply observes you with a practiced, dispassionate gaze, taking in your threadbare clothes, your nervous demeanor, the hunger etched into your young face. She's seen it all before, countless times. Every woman who walks through that door carries a story of desperation. And she knows it. She gestures towards a seat with a sweep of her hand. Her movements economical. "Sit," she says, her voice low and surprisingly calm, like a quiet river flowing beneath a frozen surface. There's no dramatic interrogation, no moralizing lecture. This isn't a confessional, it's a business transaction. She asks your name, your age, and perhaps a few perfunctory questions about your health and experience. Though the latter is usually self-evident, you stammer out your replies, your voice feeling tiny and lost in the warm, enclosed space. This mundane, almost bureaucratic intake process is a stark contrast to the momentous decision you just made. It's a mainstream historical fact that many madams were former prostitutes themselves, having managed to save enough to open their own establishments, often offering a slightly more stable, albeit still precarious, existence than working on the streets. Historians still argue whether the apparent order within some of these larger brothels genuinely offered more protection to women than independent streetwalking, or if it simply shifted the exploitation from individual men to a system run by the madam. You find yourself wondering if the other women here are as nervous as you are, or if they've simply learned to wear a mask of indifference. A quirky tidbit: some madams insisted on a certain level of education or even musical talent from their girls, especially in the more exclusive establishments, sometimes even hiring music teachers to polish the wares. It was all part of creating an experience. You see, not just a transaction. The madam finishes her quiet interrogation and nods. A faint, almost imperceptible gesture. She tells you the rules. No arguing with clients. No drinking more than allowed. Always be presentable. She outlines the financial arrangements. A percentage of your earnings. A fee for lodging and food. Perhaps even a deduction for the house dress she'll provide. It's a harsh calculation, leaving you with precious little. But it's enough to survive. Enough to eat. Enough to stay out of the biting cold. For now, that's all that matters. You're not quite a person anymore. Perhaps. But a commodity, with a price tag and a set of instructions. The warmth of the fire feels both comforting and vaguely menacing, promising a brief reprieve from the street's harshness. But at what cost? You're in. Your new life, such as it is, has begun. Your first day, or rather, your first evening, is a blur of new sensations and confusing instructions. You're led to a small room, sparsely furnished with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a tiny wardrobe. It's clean, though, surprisingly so, and the relief of having a private space, however modest, washes over you. No more sleeping on cold cobblestones or in crowded, vermin-infested lodging houses. This is luxury, of a sort. The madam explains that you'll share a room with another girl, but for now, you're alone. This brief solitude is a small mercy, allowing you to process the enormity of your new situation before the demands begin. The daily routine quickly asserts itself, a surprisingly regimented schedule that governs every hour. You learn that mornings are for rest, a precious few hours of oblivion after the long nights. Then comes the waking, not gentle, but punctuated by the madam's sharp rap on the door, or the call of a maid. You rise, your body stiff and unwilling, and begin the ritual of preparation. There's the communal washing area, a basin of cold water, and perhaps a sliver of soap. Cleanliness, while often superficial, is paramount. You are, after all, a product, and even a tarnished product needs to be presentable. It's a bit like trying to make a perpetually tired houseplant look perky and vibrant. You do your best with what you've got. Then comes the most important part of the day, getting dressed. Not in your own threadbare clothes, but in the garments provided by the house. These aren't the scandalous, revealing outfits you might imagine from sensationalist stories. In fact, many were surprisingly modest, often simple, clean dresses designed to appear respectable, or at least, not overtly disreputable. Some establishments even had a uniform of sorts, ensuring a certain look for their girls. It's a mainstream historical fact that the variety of brothels was vast. From opulent palaces of pleasure, catering to the aristocracy, to squalid, dangerous flash houses in the slums. Your attire would depend entirely on the class of establishment you found yourself in. This enforced presentation, however, serves a double purpose. It makes you appear acceptable to clients, but it also strips away your individual identity, making you just another girl in the madam's employ. After dressing, there's a meager breakfast, usually tea and stale bread, eaten quickly in a communal kitchen, often in silence. The atmosphere is tense, a quiet anticipation of the evening to come. Then, perhaps, a few hours of waiting, mending clothes, or perhaps a chore assigned by the madam. You might be asked to help with light cleaning, polishing brass, or tidying the parlor. It's all part of keeping the house running, blurring the lines between a home and a business. A quirky tidbit: some madams, particularly in higher-end establishments, would insist on their girls learning rudimentary French or playing a musical instrument, believing these accomplishments added to their allure and justified higher fees. It was, in a strange way, a form of professional development. As the afternoon wears on, a sense of quiet dread begins to settle in. The lamps are lit earlier now, pushing back the encroaching darkness. You might spend some time in the parlor, waiting for the first clients to arrive. This is the on display part of the day, where you are expected to be available, to smile, to engage in polite conversation, to subtly entice. Historians still argue whether the quiet passivity often expected of brothel workers was a form of self-preservation or a further erosion of their agency. It's a delicate dance, balancing the need to appear desirable with the desire to remain invisible, to protect what little piece of yourself you still possess. The evenings are long, stretching into the small hours of the morning. You learn to read the faces of the men who enter, to anticipate their moods, to quickly gauge what they want. It's an exhausting performance, demanding emotional labor you never knew you possessed. Every polite laugh, every feigned interest, every forced smile chips away at your spirit. And through it all, the madam watches, ever vigilant, a silent judge of your performance, always ensuring that the house's interests are served first. The routine is relentless, a continuous cycle of sleep, preparation, and forced gaiety, broken only by the brief, transactional encounters that define your nights. As you settle into the rhythm of the brothel, you begin to discern the subtle, yet rigid, hierarchy that governs life within its walls. It's not just the madam at the top, though her authority is absolute, below her. There's a pecking order among the girls themselves. An unspoken understanding of who holds what status, often dictated by age, experience, or simply the madam's arbitrary favor. You, as the newest arrival, are at the very bottom, learning the ropes, often given the less desirable clients or tasks. It's a bit like being the new intern in a very peculiar, high-stakes office. Only your performance is judged not on spreadsheets, but on other metrics. There are the older girls, jaded and resigned, who have seen countless women come and go. They might offer a gruff word of advice, a cynical laugh, or perhaps a sharp elbow if you unknowingly encroach on their territory. They've learned the hard lessons, and their cynicism is often a protective shell. Then there might be a few favorites, girls who are particularly beautiful, or perhaps exceptionally charming, who are reserved for the more affluent or demanding clients. These women might be afforded slightly better rooms, or a little more leniency from the madam, but their position is always precarious, dependent on fleeting beauty and the whims of men. Historians still argue whether these internal hierarchies fostered a sense of community among the women or further atomized them, making solidarity difficult. Beyond the girls, there's a small contingent of support staff. There might be a cook, often a stern, elderly woman who presides over the kitchen with an iron ladle, and one or two maids who clean, run errands, and perform countless other domestic duties. These women, while not engaged in the same work as you, are complicit in the enterprise, their livelihoods tied to its success. Their gaze might be pitying, indifferent, or even resentful, seeing you as both a source of their employment and a constant reminder of the moral abyss that touches them too. It's a mainstream historical fact that many women working as domestic servants earned so little that falling into prostitution was a common and often unavoidable outcome when they lost their positions. So, the line between maid and fallen woman was often terrifyingly thin. The madam, of course, is the undisputed ruler. Her word is law. She manages the finances, procures supplies, handles the police, and acts as the gatekeeper to the outside world. She sets the prices, takes the lion's share of the earnings, and doles out punishments for transgressions, which can range from withheld meals to outright dismissal. A terrifying prospect that would leave you back on the streets. She is both your employer and, in a twisted sense, your protector from the far greater dangers of true destitution. Her authority, however, is not always absolute. She herself must navigate a complex web of relationships with local constables, landlords, and powerful patrons, sometimes paying protection money or offering discreet favors to ensure the house remains undisturbed. A quirky tidbit: some madams were known to enforce strict rules of etiquette, even within the brothel, believing that a veneer of gentility would attract higher-paying clients. This might include insisting on proper table manners during shared meals or even having reading hours, where girls were encouraged to improve their literacy. Imagine that, being told to read Jane Austen before your next client arrives. It's a darkly humorous detail in an otherwise grim existence. You learn quickly to observe, to adapt, to keep your head down, to avoid drawing the madam's ire, to navigate the subtle social currents among the girls, and to understand the unspoken rules that dictate your every move. Every glance, every gesture, every tone of voice carries weight. You are always performing, always being observed, even when you think you're alone. This constant scrutiny, this relentless pressure to conform, shapes your very being, slowly eroding the boundaries of yourself. You are no longer just you. You are a component in the madam's carefully constructed enterprise. A cog in a discreetly spinning wheel. The hours of the evening bleed into one another, marked by the arrival and departure of clients. You quickly learn that men are not a monolithic block. They come in all shapes, sizes, and temperaments. Some are gruff and silent, wanting only to conclude their business quickly and leave. Others are surprisingly talkative, perhaps lonely, seeking a moment of fleeting connection, even if that connection is paid for. You learn to listen to their stories, or pretend to, nodding in the right places, offering a sympathetic hum. It's a performance. Yes, but sometimes, a genuine glimpse of another life flickers across their faces, revealing anxieties and desires not so different from your own, just with far more resources. You encounter the boisterous ones, flushed with drink, their laughter too loud, their hands perhaps a little too eager. These are the ones the madam watches carefully, ready to intervene if things escalate too far. Then there are the melancholic ones, their eyes heavy with a sadness that seems to have followed them in from the foggy streets. They might talk about their wives, their businesses, their regrets. It's in these moments that the transaction feels less like a simple exchange of money for services and more like a bizarre, temporary confessional booth. You listen, you nod, you offer a platitude or two, and you pray they don't linger too long. A mainstream historical fact often overlooked is the sheer variety of men who frequented brothels. It wasn't just the working class or the desperate. Gentlemen, merchants, respectable family men, even clergymen sometimes sought out these establishments. The need for discretion was paramount for many. And the madam, with her network of contacts and her strict rules of silence, provided that invaluable service. For many men, the brothel was a place where societal rules could be temporarily suspended, where desires that were otherwise taboo could be indulged without fear of public censure. You learn to manage expectations, both yours and theirs. Some men are kind, almost apologetic, treating you with a surprising tenderness that feels both alien and vaguely unsettling. Others are crude, demanding, treating you with an impersonal brusqueness that reminds you exactly where you stand. You develop a thick skin, a protective layer against the emotional assaults, learning to compartmentalize, to separate yourself from the body that is currently being used. It's a mental trick, a survival mechanism, allowing you to endure the indignity without breaking completely. Historians still argue whether this emotional detachment was a conscious strategy for survival or an inevitable psychological consequence of the work. There's a quirky tidbit about some of the more eccentric clients. Some gentlemen would pay simply for conversation, or to play cards, or even just to be read to. The intimacy wasn't always physical. Sometimes, it was simply the yearning for companionship in a lonely city, a brief escape from the rigid expectations of Victorian society. Imagine a gruff businessman paying you to simply listen to him complain about his wife's extravagant spending, or a shy young clerk paying to hear you read aloud from a penny dreadful. It's a strange, unexpected twist in an otherwise bleak landscape. Each encounter is a miniature drama, played out behind closed doors. You learn to perform, to become whatever the client needs you to be for those brief, uncomfortable minutes. The clock ticks slowly, each minute stretching into an eternity. And when it's over, you breathe a quiet sigh of relief, smooth your dress, and prepare for the next knock on the door, for the next stranger whose desires you must meet, whose humanity you must navigate, even as your own feels increasingly distant. Now, let's talk brass tacks. Or rather, pounds, shillings, and pence, because, at its core, this establishment, like all others, is a business, a peculiar, clandestine business, but a business nonetheless. And you, my dear, are a crucial part of its inventory. Understanding the financial machinery of the brothel is key to understanding your place within it. Every client who enters and every service rendered translates directly into money, a portion of which is theoretically yours. The madam sets the prices, and these vary wildly depending on the establishment's reputation, its location, and the specific services offered. A quick encounter in a dimly lit, lower-end house might cost a shilling or two, barely enough for a working man's meal. In a more exclusive West End establishment, however, a client might pay several guineas, a sum that could support a poor family for weeks. It's a mainstream historical fact that the average daily wage for a skilled male labourer in Victorian London was around 3 to 5 shillings. So even a cheap brothel visit represented a significant expenditure for many. Imagine saving up for days just for a few minutes of fleeting pleasure. It puts things into perspective, doesn't it? When a client selects you, The agreed upon sum is usually paid to the madam directly, or to an intermediary like a maid, before the client ever steps behind a closed door with you. This ensures the house always gets its cut, regardless of what transpires afterwards. From this initial payment, a substantial portion is immediately deducted by the madam. This isn't just for profit. It's meant to cover the cost of your room and board, the gaslight, the heating, the food, and any other expenses she deems appropriate. Sometimes, she'll even charge you for the clothes she provides, or for medical inspections, if they're required. This creates a clever system of perpetual debt, making it incredibly difficult for you to save enough money to escape. It's a bit like a Victorian-era subscription service, except you're the one being sold, and the fees just keep accumulating. What's left over, the meager remainder, is your actual earnings, and even this isn't usually given to you immediately. Often, madams would hold onto a portion of the girl's earnings, sometimes doling it out weekly, or even less frequently, to prevent them from absconding or spending it too freely on drink or other temptations. This system further entrenches your dependency. You might go days, even weeks, without seeing actual cash in your hand, always operating on a sort of internal ledger within the madam's mind. Historians still argue whether the extreme financial control exercised by madams was primarily for their own enrichment or genuinely a paternalistic attempt to manage the lives of often vulnerable women. A quirky tidbit: some madams would even offer a form of credit to particularly loyal or well-heeled clients, allowing them to run up tabs, which then increased the pressure on the girls to keep these lucrative customers happy. It was a high-stakes game of financial trust, often with little to no legal recourse if a client defaulted. Can you imagine chasing down a duke for an unpaid bill for services rendered? No, neither can I. So, while the illusion of earning your own way might exist, the reality is that you are caught in a financial trap. Every shilling earned is immediately reduced by a complex web of deductions and fees, leaving you with just enough to survive, but never enough to truly break free. The money comes in, and almost immediately, it flows out, ensuring you remain tethered to the brothel, always in need, always dependent. It's a relentless cycle, a constant reminder that your body is currency, and that currency is always being devalued. Amidst the relentless grind, the endless parade of faces, and the constant awareness of your precarious existence, there are, surprisingly, moments of respite. They are fleeting, almost imperceptible, like tiny pinpricks of light in a vast darkness. But they exist. These aren't grand escapes, no joyous frolics through sunlit meadows, but rather small, almost private comforts that offer a momentary reprieve from the harsh realities of your daily life. One such comfort might be the warmth of the fire on a particularly cold night, its flickering flames casting dancing shadows on the parlor walls as you wait for clients. You might find yourself simply staring into the embers, allowing your mind to drift away from the present, if only for a few seconds. Or perhaps it's the rare luxury of a full, hot meal, prepared by the cook, a hearty stew or a surprisingly tender piece of meat, that truly fills your stomach. A sensation you rarely experienced on the streets. For a fleeting moment, the gnawing hunger is silenced. And that, in itself, is a profound comfort. It's a mainstream historical fact that for many working-class women, consistent access to nutritious food was a luxury, not a given, making even the brothel's basic provisions a step up from starvation. Then there are the friendships, fragile and often unspoken, that form between the girls. You are all in this together, bound by a shared fate and a mutual understanding of the indignities you face. A knowing glance across a crowded room, a shared, silent sigh of exhaustion, a quiet word of encouragement when a client is particularly difficult. These small gestures of solidarity are invaluable. You might find a confidant, another girl who listens without judgment as you whisper your fears and frustrations after hours. Curled up on a narrow bed, you share stories, dreams that feel impossibly distant, and the grim realities of your past. These are the moments when you are not just a commodity, but a person, seen and understood by another. Historians still argue whether these bonds were truly supportive or if they were often tainted by jealousy and competition. Given the scarcity of resources and male attention. A quirky tidbit: some brothels, especially the slightly more established ones, might have allowed the girls a day off, perhaps once a month, to visit a park or even a museum, albeit under strict supervision. Imagine that, a brief escape into the relative normalcy of public life. Seeing the world beyond the brothel's walls, even if you had to pretend you were a respectable lady out for a stroll. It was a rare chance to breathe air that didn't smell of stale perfume and desperation. You might find comfort in simple routines, the precise way you fold your clothes, the quiet ritual of washing your face, the almost meditative act of mending a tear in your dress. These small acts of control in a life where you have so little control can be surprisingly soothing. Or perhaps it's the quiet hum of the gaslight in the late hours, after the last client has left, and the house settles into a temporary stillness, a brief lull before the next day's demands begin. These quiet moments, however brief, are vital for your sanity, allowing you to regroup, to reclaim a tiny piece of yourself before the performance must begin anew. They are the hidden oases in a vast, unforgiving desert, and you cling to them desperately. The moment you step out of your shared room, the expectation to be on begins. Your appearance isn't just about personal vanity. It's a critical component of the brothel's business model and your own precarious survival. The madam might provide you with dresses, often well worn but clean, meant to create an illusion of respectability or alluring charm. You quickly learn the tricks of the trade: how to arrange your hair to conceal signs of exhaustion, how to apply a touch of rouge to feign a healthy glow, even when you feel anything but. This meticulous attention to superficial details is a mainstream historical fact. Women of the night often spent considerable time on their presentation, sometimes using elaborate hairstyles and makeup, though often subtle enough not to be overtly scandalous. It's a bit like trying to polish a tarnished penny until it gleams like gold. You might fool some, but the underlying metal remains the same. The constant pressure to maintain an appealing facade is relentless. You are perpetually aware of your body, not as your own, but as an object of scrutiny and desire. There's the uncomfortable corsetry, pinching your waist to achieve the fashionable silhouette, making it difficult to breathe deeply. The heavy fabrics of the dresses, designed to be alluring, can feel suffocating after hours under gaslight. And the shoes, often ill-fitting, pinch and rub, leaving your feet aching by the end of the long night. Every morning, you inspect yourself in the dim light, looking for any blemishes, any signs of weariness that might betray the facade. Beyond the daily struggle with appearance, there are the far more insidious threats: societal judgment and disease. The very nature of your work carries an inescapable social stigma. Even if you left the brothel, the taint of your past would likely follow you, making it almost impossible to find respectable employment or integrate back into conventional society. This is the societal deception you live with. The public consumes your services but condemns your existence. Historians still argue whether the extreme moral condemnation of prostitutes was primarily a tool for social control or a genuine reflection of Victorian religious beliefs. It's a cruel paradox, isn't it? Then there's the ever-present shadow of illness. Venereal diseases, like syphilis and gonorrhea, are terrifyingly common and largely untreatable in this era. Every client presents a potential risk, and the fear of contagion is a constant, gnawing anxiety. There are no reliable preventatives, and cures are often ineffective, painful, or worse than the disease itself. You might witness other girls suffering, their bodies slowly ravaged by disease, a stark and horrifying warning of your own potential future. The madam might insist on periodic inspections, often humiliating and invasive, carried out by a doctor, sometimes reluctantly, in an attempt to protect her investment. But these are often cursory and rarely truly effective. A quirky tidbit: some desperate women would resort to unusual, even dangerous, home remedies for preventing or treating these diseases, often passed down through word of mouth. These might include concoctions of herbs, strange poultices, or even the bizarre practice of douching with various acidic liquids, none of which offered any real protection and often caused more harm than good. It was a testament to their desperation in a time before modern medicine. You learn to live with this constant vulnerability, the knowledge that your body, the very instrument of your survival, is also the source of your greatest danger. The fleeting moments of pleasure or comfort offered by clients are always overshadowed by this pervasive fear. This knowledge that one wrong encounter could seal your fate, leading to disfigurement, madness, or a slow, agonizing death. It's a terrifying gamble, played out night after night, with your own life as the ultimate stake. As if the internal struggles weren't enough, the ever-shifting sands of the law loom large over your existence. Prostitution in Victorian England wasn't outright illegal in the way theft or murder was. But it was certainly not condoned. Instead, it occupied a murky legal grey area, often targeted not directly, but through a series of vague statutes and moral policing efforts. This ambiguity made life incredibly precarious, as what was tolerated one day could lead to arrest the next, often at the whim of local authorities. It's a bit like playing a game where the rules keep changing, and you're always on the losing team. The most significant, and arguably most infamous, piece of legislation was the Contagious Diseases Acts of the 1860s. This was a mainstream historical fact that caused immense public outcry and debate. These acts, initially applied to garrison towns and ports, allowed for the compulsory medical examination of any woman suspected of being a prostitute. If found to be infected with a venereal disease, she could be detained in a lock hospital for treatment, sometimes for months, against her will. The stated aim was to protect the health of the military and navy. But in practice, it stripped women of their civil liberties, subjecting them to humiliating and often painful procedures. Imagine being dragged from your bed and forced into an examination by a male doctor, with no right to refuse, simply on the suspicion of a police officer. Historians still argue whether these acts were a genuine public health measure or primarily a tool for social control, punishing women while largely ignoring the male clients who were the source of the contagion. The hypocrisy was glaring. Men faced no such compulsory examinations or detentions. The laws created a climate of fear and vulnerability, leaving women susceptible to arbitrary arrest and detention, even if you tried to live a respectable life after leaving the brothel. A past association could still lead to you being targeted under these acts. Beyond these specific laws, there were other means of control. Loitering, public indecency, or disorderly conduct could all be invoked by a zealous police constable to arrest a woman. Madams often had to pay bribes or cultivate relationships with local constabulary to ensure their establishments were left alone. The line between what was permissible and what was punishable was incredibly fluid, making every step outside the brothel, even a quick errand, fraught with risk. A quirky tidbit is that police often relied on informants, including other prostitutes or former madams, to identify disorderly houses or individual streetwalkers. It was a brutal system that sometimes pitted the very victims against each other. You learn to live with a constant low hum of anxiety about the law. A sudden knock on the door, the sight of a police uniform, the whispered rumors of another raid down the street, these moments send shivers down your spine. You're always aware that your fragile existence could be shattered at any moment. Not by your own actions, but by the capricious enforcement of laws designed to control and punish, rather than protect. The legal framework of Victorian England didn't offer you protection. It offered another layer of vulnerability, ensuring that even if you escaped the poverty that led you here, you might never truly escape the shadow of the law. The brothel, for all its confinement, isn't an entirely sealed world. There are glimpses, fleeting and often tantalizing, of the life beyond its walls. These moments, however brief, serve as sharp reminders of the freedom you've lost and the society that both enables and condemns your existence. You might catch snippets of conversations from clients, tales of their families, their businesses, or the political events of the day. They bring in news from the outside, often without realizing they're providing a window to a world you can only observe from behind a curtain. Sometimes, you're allowed to leave the house for brief, supervised errands. Perhaps you accompany the madam or a maid to the local market. Or to a dressmaker. Stepping onto the bustling Victorian street is an assault on the senses after the enclosed atmosphere of the brothel. The cacophony of street vendors hawking their wares, the clatter of horse-drawn omnibuses, the shouts of newsboys, and the endless stream of humanity, it's overwhelming and exhilarating all at once. You see respectable ladies with their parasols and bonnets, children playing hopscotch, and gentlemen striding purposefully along the pavements. You observe them, and they, largely, ignore you, or perhaps cast a quick, discerning glance that instantly assesses your station. It's a mainstream historical fact that while prostitution was widespread, it was also carefully segregated, with certain areas of cities known for the red light districts, allowing respectable society to largely avoid direct confrontation with it. These excursions are a double-edged sword. On one hand, they offer a breath of fresh air, a moment of fleeting normalcy. On the other, they highlight your stark isolation. You are an outsider, forever marked by your profession. You learn to walk with a certain anonymity, head slightly bowed, eyes downcast, blending into the background as much as possible. You try to absorb every detail, the fashion, the shop window displays, the expressions on people's faces, as if to bottle up these fragments of normal life for later contemplation. It's a bit like watching a play unfold through a dusty window. You see the action, but you can't participate. There are also the regular visitors, the delivery boys, the coalmen, perhaps even a local doctor or a pharmacist who makes discreet calls. They are glimpses of the normal world interacting with your abnormal one. Their presence reinforces the idea that the brothel, for all its secrecy, is still woven into the fabric of the city's commerce and daily life. Historians still argue whether the apparent acceptance of brothels by local communities was a sign of tacit approval or simply an acknowledgement of an unavoidable social reality. After all, these establishments generated income for many beyond the madam and the girls. A quirky tidbit is that some brothels would even employ musicians, often a lone pianist or a small string ensemble, to play background music in the parlor, creating a more respectable and inviting atmosphere for clients. Imagine trying to make polite conversation with a gentleman over a slightly off-key rendition of a popular waltz, all while trying to maintain your composure. It adds another layer of bizarre normalcy to the situation, doesn't it? These connections to the outside world, however superficial, are vital. They prevent the brothel from becoming a complete vacuum, a total prison, but they also serve as a constant reminder of the life you've been forced to abandon, and the freedom that feels impossibly far away, just beyond your reach. On the other side of that heavy door, the daily grind, the enforced pleasantries, the constant threat of disease and legal scrutiny, all of this begins to take a profound toll. Not just on your body, but on your very soul. The price of secrecy, of living a life hidden from the respectable world, is a heavy one, paid in emotional currency. You learn to wear a mask, a practiced smile that rarely reaches your eyes, a veneer of indifference that protects you from the emotional demands of the work. It's a mainstream historical fact that many women in prostitution developed coping mechanisms, ranging from heavy drinking and drug use to a profound emotional detachment, to endure their circumstances. It's a bit like living behind a pane of frosted glass. You can see the world, and the world can vaguely see you, but true connection is almost impossible. The constant need for deception is exhausting. You are always performing, always pretending to be interested, pretending to be happy, pretending not to feel the shame or the fear that gnaws at you from within. You adopt different personas for different clients, becoming whatever they want you to be for a brief period, then shedding that skin the moment they leave. This constant role-playing blurs the lines of your own identity. Who are you, really, when you are always pretending to be someone else? Historians still argue whether this fragmentation of self led to a complete loss of identity or if it allowed women to maintain a core sense of self. Hidden beneath the performance, the psychological impact of the work is insidious. The lack of control over your own body, the forced intimacy, the constant objectification, it all chips away at your sense of dignity and self-worth. You might find yourself feeling numb, emotionally deadened. As a way to cope with the indignities, laughter feels brittle, joy is fleeting, and sadness often turns into a dull ache that you carry silently. Sleep, when it comes, is often restless, haunted by the faces of clients or the fear of what the next day will bring. There's the loneliness, a profound isolation even when surrounded by others. You are in a house full of women, but true intimacy, the kind that nurtures and supports, is rare and fragile. Each woman is fighting her own battle, and while there might be camaraderie, there's also an unspoken understanding that everyone is ultimately alone in their struggle. The respectable world has shunned you, and within the brothel, genuine connection is often a luxury you can't afford. A quirky tidbit is that some women, in an attempt to retain a sense of control or personal expression, would secretly write poetry or keep diaries, sometimes burying them for fear of discovery. These hidden fragments offer rare glimpses into their inner lives, a desperate attempt to hold on to their own thoughts and feelings. You live with the constant threat of exposure, the fear that someone from your past might recognize you, or that your secret will be revealed to the world. This anxiety makes you wary of any interaction outside the brothel's walls, forcing you further into isolation. Every polite conversation with a tradesman or a brief glance from a passerby feels like a potential moment of discovery. A moment when your carefully constructed facade might crumble. The weight of this secret is immense, a constant companion that overshadows every waking moment. It's a relentless emotional tax, ensuring that even when you are physically safe, your spirit remains perpetually under siege. The thought of escaping, of leaving this life behind, is a persistent whisper in your mind, a fragile hope that flickers even in the darkest hours. But while the desire is strong, the pathways out are fraught with immense hurdles, making true freedom feel like an almost impossible dream. It's not simply a matter of walking out the door. The societal structures of Victorian England were designed to keep women like you trapped. Firstly, there's the financial trap, which we touched upon. The madam system of deductions and controlled payouts ensures that you rarely accumulate enough money to simply leave and start anew. Even if you manage to save a few shillings, it's rarely enough to secure lodging, food, and the means to travel or find legitimate work. You are often in a state of perpetual debt or just barely breaking even, making any substantial escape fund an impossibility. It's a bit like trying to climb out of a well by grabbing at wet string. You might get a little purchase, but you're constantly slipping back down. Then there's the social stigma. Even if you somehow managed to get away, your past would follow you like a shadow. For a mainstream historical fact, a woman known to have been a prostitute would find it nearly impossible to secure respectable employment. No shopkeeper would hire you. No family would take you on as a domestic servant. And marriage to a man of any standing would be out of the question. You would be forever branded, relegated to the margins of society, often with no choice but to return to the very life you tried to flee. Historians still argue whether the extreme social ostracism of fallen women was more damaging than the act of prostitution itself, effectively condemning them to a life with no escape. Lack of skills is another significant barrier. Many women entered this life young, with little to no education or marketable skills beyond needlework or basic domestic chores, which paid barely enough to survive. Years spent in a brothel further isolated them from opportunities to learn new trades. You might be proficient at entertaining clients, but that skill offers no transferable value in the outside world. This lack of practical alternatives further entrenches your dependency on the only profession open to you. There were, however, some glimmering lights. Rescue societies existed, often run by charitable women and religious organizations, aiming to rehabilitate fallen women. They offered shelter, moral instruction, and sometimes vocational training in laundries or needlework. However, these homes often came with strict rules, forced religious conversion, and a rigid, unforgiving moral code that many women found hard to endure after years of relative autonomy. Even within the confines of a brothel, a quirky tidbit, some of these rescue homes insisted on their residents wearing distinct uniforms, often drab and penitential, which, while perhaps intended to erase their past, also served to identify them publicly, further cementing their stigma. The personal cost of escaping was also immense. It meant severing ties, however fragile, with the women you'd shared your days and nights with, and facing an unknown future alone. The fear of failure, of being caught and returned, or simply of starving on the streets once more, was a powerful deterrent. So, while the thought of freedom lingered, the practical realities of achieving it often seemed insurmountable, trapping you in a cycle that was incredibly difficult to break. Despite the pervasive judgment and the harsh realities of your existence, you encounter individuals who offer surprising acts of kindness, and conversely, those who reinforce the cruelty of your world. Not every interaction is transactional. Sometimes, a moment of unexpected humanity, or indeed, surprising disdain, punctures the otherwise predictable flow of your days. You'll meet clients who, for all their desires, treat you with a surprising degree of politeness, almost tenderness. Perhaps it's a shy young man, clearly uncomfortable but trying to be respectful, who offers you an extra shilling with a mumbled apology. Or an older gentleman, lonely and perhaps a little confused, who simply wants to talk about his late wife and offers a quiet, heartfelt thank you for your listening ear. These moments, however rare, are like tiny unexpected gifts, a momentary glimpse of a world where you are seen as more than just a body for sale. It's a mainstream historical fact that many men who frequented brothels were not inherently villainous, but rather products of a society that offered few outlets for male intimacy and sexual expression outside of marriage, often for economic reasons. Sometimes, these interactions can be genuinely confusing, blurring the lines between client and confessor, customer and a fleeting friend. Then there are the not-so-strangers, the various tradespeople who regularly deliver supplies to the brothel, the baker, the grocer, the coalman. Most are brusque and businesslike, perhaps casting a furtive glance but otherwise maintaining a professional distance. But occasionally, you might encounter one who offers a quiet nod of acknowledgement, a sympathetic look, or even a small, illicit piece of fruit tucked discreetly into your hand. These small gestures, though minor, stand out precisely because they defy the pervasive social condemnation. They are silent acts of human recognition, cutting through the layers of shame and anonymity. Historians still argue whether the casual interactions between brothel workers and the wider community represent a hidden form of societal acceptance or merely the pragmatic necessity of commerce. Conversely, you also encounter casual cruelty, often from unexpected sources. A passing respectable woman might pull her skirt away as you brush past, her eyes filled with undisguised contempt. A child, mimicking their parents, might point and whisper, or a particularly self-righteous client might preach at you, condemning your soul even as he engages your services. These moments sting, reinforcing your status as an outcast, reminding you of the rigid moral boundaries that separate your world from theirs. It's a bit like being a ghost haunting a vibrant city. You're present, but entirely disconnected from its life. A quirky tidbit: some madams, if they had a charitable streak, might occasionally allow a particularly kind or loyal client to pay for a girl's medical treatment if she fell ill, provided it was not too severe. It was a rare occurrence, a small gesture of benevolence that served to keep both the girl and the client bound to the establishment. It's a strange dance of power and dependency, where even acts of kindness are transactional. These encounters, both positive and negative, serve as constant reminders of the complex social tapestry you inhabit. They shape your perception of humanity, teaching you to discern genuine compassion from fleeting politeness, and to brace yourself against the casual cruelty of a society that prefers to look away. Each interaction, however brief, leaves its mark, slowly etching a deeper understanding of the human condition, in all its perplexing contradictions. In a life as isolated and precarious as yours, formal support systems are largely non-existent. The police are a threat. Social services are embryonic or punitive. And your family, if they even know where you are, have likely disowned you. Yet, within the shadows, there existed a surprising network of informal support, often unseen by the outside world, that provided a lifeline for women in your position. These weren't grand charities or organized institutions. They were the subtle acts of solidarity, the shared knowledge, and the quiet assistance exchanged between those living on the fringes. One of the most crucial support networks was often the madam herself. Paradoxical as that may seem, while she exploited your labor, she also offered a measure of protection from the far greater dangers of the streets. From violent clients, or from direct police harassment, she provided a roof over your head, food, and a semblance of safety. For many women, this was a trade-off, a devil's bargain that was still preferable to absolute destitution. A mainstream historical fact is that many madams, having often been prostitutes themselves, understood the brutal realities of the life and sometimes offered a crude form of maternal care or guidance. Albeit always within the framework of their business. It's a bit like a lion tamer offering you a blanket in your cage. It's still a cage. But at least you're not freezing. Then there were the other girls in the house. While competition certainly existed, so too did a powerful sense of shared experience. You might warn another girl about a particularly difficult client, share a scrap of food, or offer comfort after a particularly bruising encounter. Whispered advice on how to deal with certain men, how to avoid a bad temper, or even how to make a particular dress look more appealing. These informal exchanges of knowledge were invaluable. They understood your plight in a way no one else could, forming a silent sisterhood forged in shared hardship. Historians still argue whether the sense of community among prostitutes was strong enough to constitute genuine solidarity, or if it was overshadowed by the individualistic struggle for survival. Beyond the brothel walls, there were often other women in similar circumstances, streetwalkers or those in smaller, less organized establishments. A network of whispered warnings about a dangerous area, a particularly cruel police officer, or a contagious client could spread surprisingly quickly through these informal channels. It was a kind of rudimentary intelligence network, vital for survival in a hostile urban environment. You might learn of a sympathetic pawnbroker who wouldn't ask too many questions, or a discreet pharmacist who would treat a minor ailment without judgment. A quirky tidbit is that specific pubs or coffee houses in certain districts often served as unofficial meeting points for women in the trade. Places where they could exchange information, find temporary shelter, or even discreetly meet potential clients, away from the direct scrutiny of the madams. And then, very rarely, you might encounter an individual helper, a compassionate doctor who genuinely tried to ease your suffering, perhaps a kindly shopkeeper who gave you a small discount, or even a sympathetic maid from a respectable household who offered a warm meal or a moment of quiet conversation. These were not systemic supports, but rather individual acts of defiance against the prevailing social norms. Small islands of humanity in a sea of indifference. These unseen support networks, fragile and informal as they were, offered crucial moments of connection and practical assistance, providing a thin thread of hope in a life designed to extinguish it. They underscore the resilience of individuals in the face of overwhelming adversity. As the years, or perhaps just the months, begin to blur into an indistinguishable stream, you start to feel the profound weight of this life, its indelible mark upon you. Your existence here isn't a temporary detour. It has become the landscape of your being. The vibrant woman you once were, full of tentative hopes and fears, has faded into a quiet echo, replaced by a resilience born of hardship, and a profound weariness. This is not a life lived, but a life endured. a testament to the human capacity for survival even in the most soul-crushing circumstances. The memories of past dreams, of a different life you might have lived, now feel distant, like half-remembered stories from another person's existence. You no longer dwell on what might have been, for the present demands all your energy. You've learned to focus on the small victories, a peaceful night without trouble, a moment of shared laughter with another girl, the rare comfort of true sleep. These tiny triumphs are what sustain you. It's a mainstream historical fact that for many women in prostitution, the sheer act of survival, day after day, was an extraordinary feat of endurance in a society that offered them little to no support. You've witnessed countless faces come and go, clients, other girls, even madams. Some vanish without a trace, swallowed by the city's indifferent maw. Others return, their lives outside somehow intersecting with yours in this strange, transactional dance. You've learned to read the subtle shifts in the city's mood, the changing seasons, the ebb and flow of the gaslight. The brothel, once a terrifying unknown, has become your world, a place of grim routine but also of a peculiar, almost haunting familiarity. It's a bit like a well-worn coat. It might be tattered and stained, but it's the only warmth you have. The sounds of the house become a part of you, the creak of the stairs, the murmur of voices, the distant clang of a streetcar, even the scents, stale perfume, coal smoke, damp wool, evoke a complex mix of resignation and belonging. This transient existence, where every interaction is fleeting, paradoxically creates its own form of permanence. You are a part of the city's hidden pulse, an unseen but undeniable presence in its underbelly. Historians still argue whether the anonymity of city life offered a perverse kind of freedom to these women, allowing them to exist outside the rigid strictures of respectable society, or if it simply heightened their vulnerability. A quirky tidbit: some women would adopt entirely new names, shedding their birth identities upon entering the life. This allowed for a psychological separation, a way to compartmentalize their past selves from their current roles. Imagine creating a new persona, a stage name for your life, as a way to cope with the profound dissonance of your daily reality. It was a silent act of self-preservation, a final, desperate attempt to hold onto a core piece of who you were, even if only to yourself. As you gaze into the flickering gaslight, you understand that your story, though personal and profoundly difficult, is also one of countless untold narratives. You are a fading echo of a life, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, forced to navigate an impossible landscape with courage, cunning, and an unwavering will to survive. Your mark on the world may be invisible to most, but the echoes of your struggle resonate through the very fabric of this bustling, indifferent city. The gaslight dims a little further, casting longer, softer shadows across the room. The sounds of the city outside begin to recede, becoming a gentle, distant hum. Your eyelids feel heavy, a pleasant weight after the long day. The details of the room, the textures of the warm furniture, start to soften at the edges, blurring into a comforting indistinctness. The stories we've explored tonight, of resilience and survival, of a world both harsh and strangely intimate, are fading now, dissolving into the quiet of the night. Let your thoughts drift, like smoke rings curling lazily upwards, then dissipating into the vast, empty space above you. There's nothing more to worry about, nothing to analyze, just the quiet breath of the moment, the anxieties of the day, the worries of tomorrow. They can wait. For now, there is only this gentle quiet, this easing into stillness. Allow your body to sink deeper into whatever soft surface holds you, feeling the embrace of the darkness. The figures from our story are just shadows now, retreating into the historical mists from which they emerged, leaving only a whisper of their existence behind. Rest, close your eyes, and simply let go. Sleep now.